Voice activated. I thank you for coming out tonight on this rainy evening in the winter. We are very excited that we are coming to the end of our Benton County Criminal Justice Systems Assessment. And we are thrilled that you are here with us this evening to hear the results, to learn a little bit more about the alternative scenarios that we explored, and to learn about next steps with respect to the Benton County criminal justice system, how we are going to go forward and make our decisions, and what the timeline is likely to be. I would like to let you know that we are recording tonight, as we have the previous community forums, so that people that are not able to make it tonight are able to view this presentation later. So just for your information, questions will be recorded as well so that we can keep track of what people have asked us and learn from everything that you have to share with us this evening. Without too much further speechifying here, I would like to at least acknowledge all of our steering committee members who have been helping us as we go along through this process. And if you are a member of the steering committee for the criminal justice assessment, would you mind standing just so that people can see who you are? And I'd like to thank you very much for all of your input through the last few months. It's been a fantastic help, and I think we have put together a good team, and I look forward to working with many of you as we move into the next phase of this process. I'd also like to shout out to our staff who've put in lots and lots of time on this effort. Our internal operations team is our County Administrator Joe Kirby, Lilia Neville, our Public Information Officer, and our recently departed staff member, Kevin Perkins, who's here this evening. Thank you all for all your help bringing this process together. I'd like to now pass the microphone to Ari Basel-Ragnar, our project manager with GOBI, Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, Inc., and to Carl Becker with CGL, the project principals that we engaged to do this work. Ari?
Great, thank you, Commissioner. So can you all hear me okay? Is this on? Oh, hello. Good evening. How is everyone doing tonight? I always like to start with some gratitude and thanking you for making the time this evening to hear about the final report and next steps, for your interest, input, and expertise along the way. It actually makes my heart really smile to look out and see the faces, and many of you were at the original kickoff in this room on February 20th of last year, and in many subsequent community engagement meetings. So anyone want to come and do the first 4 slides? You've heard it so much. Go ahead, just raise your hand. The mics are working. You could. Just to show the level of interest and continuity with that is quite a statement, and it does make my heart smile to see you all. So with that, let's, what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of information on the background for those of you who aren't familiar. We're not going to do a lot of that, but to put that as a backdrop of how did we get here and who did what. Carl will talk about the analysis section and findings along with the scenarios. And Commissioner Ozero will talk about next steps during the implementation and what that looks like. So I hope that's what you came to see, because I don't have Plan B. The project team, as was mentioned in the introduction, is a combination of CGL and Greater Oregon Behavioral Health, specifically our Center of Excellence on Behavioral Health and Justice Integration. Project management, public engagement, program evaluation, process mapping. You'll get to see all the different pieces that we focused on to present, which, by the way, the final report, there's a physical copy. I know there's one online, and I wanted to hold it. So we do have this if you want to glance through it later tonight. The purpose was to provide a trusted, accessible system of justice that provides a high degree of safety and confidence. We wanted community engagement, investigate the various aspects of the criminal justice system, not a single point of it, and identify improvements to it. The vision statement, it's hard to see it. I'm not a PowerPoint person who reads a PowerPoint. That's my PowerPoint, really. But to highlight some of the pieces, it is in the report, of course, on the webpage. But I think what's so important to highlight is that we're looking at what do we all need in your community to have an effective, efficient, equitable criminal justice system. Maintains public safety, holding people accountable, and addresses the underlying issues of crime. So you're helping with improving quality of life, community safety, reduce victimization. It's a great vision. In order to effectuate that, not one person or one organization can do it, it's a community effort. So the structure that was put together to work on the assessment was the Board of County Commissioners are the lead, their vision behind this, partner organizations, community-based organizations, nonprofit groups, government organizations, business community were all involved. The operations team met every other week, sometimes weekly, depending on what was going on, to look at the 84 items that each had 42 tasks underneath them to say how are we doing and are we on time and using this budget effectively. We completed all those tasks, by the way. The last one is tonight with you all. The steering committee, as mentioned earlier, give guidance, feedback, suggestions, high expertise from different parts of the system. In the center of it all is the Benton County community members. Their engagement, feedback, perceptions, giving ideas on what to do, giving input on what their system should look like for the future. It's the center point of this. The components we looked at: prevention, justice, enforcement, accountability, and rehabilitation. So next generation of criminal justice system, really. The old ones looked at one point, and usually not in the prevention world or the treatment world. You combine them all. That's interesting. Beep, beep. The key performance drivers were programs, of course, looking at those in terms of looking at justice system improvements. What are the key drivers of that? What programs are in place? What policies affect that? What facilities, current and needed for the future? How am I doing? Should be a drum roll somewhere. I feel like, what's she building up to? It's the background. Key piece that was promised from the beginning, repeated every time we met, included in the data and the literature and in conversations with you, was a full continuum of the system. From, we call them intercepts, decision points, from the first one with community services that provide prevention services, so people who are on the trajectory to criminal behavior are prevented from that. Dealing with crisis and that whole continuum of prevention. Intercept 1 is law enforcement, starting with dispatch, who gets the calls, law enforcement who responds and how they interact with that and make decisions and assess the need. What's the capacity? What's the need there? These are the kinds of questions we looked at. Intercept 2, the initial detention, initial court hearing, looking at court processes. How do people move through the system in each one of these intercepts? What helps with that in providing justice, accountability, treatment? What are the barriers? Intercept 3 are the jails and the courts. 4 is reentry into the community. 5, community-based. Key piece about this is it's comprehensive. It starts and ends in the community. The analysis. It was a multifaceted approach. By that, we have quantitative data that Carl will talk more about on those findings, arrest data, processing data, mapping the system, capacity, policies, looking at the repeat offender population. What do they look like? How often? What is that revolving door at the jail? Offenders' needs. Qualitative data, a lot of community input through community forums, workshops, and meetings with groups. And we also went to the fair and asked people at the fair to fill out a survey. Not everybody can make it to a night meeting, so wanted to reach out as much as possible. So I spent 3 days at your fair. I love the hot dogs, the corn dogs. I need to do a lot of some exercising to de-fair, but it was fun. I love talking to your community members and people walking through there. Research. We looked at previous assessments that the county has invested in, so they're not sitting on some shelf collecting dust. we looked at what was in those and how can we implement that into our current work that you're being presented with tonight. Looked at evidence-based practices, what we know works to decrease crime, what they have found that will increase it. That exists too. 40 years plus of research. It's a science about this now. And we synthesized all that together into the various elements of the scenarios. How's that for background? I feel like I should put it to music at this point. But you don't want to hear me sing. Justice system goals have a rapid and effective response to crimes as they occur, efficient processing, incarceration based on potential risk to reoffend. You're making the best use of those high-end resources. Treatment programs, case management, that combination. The findings in a summary page, and really, this is it's hard to condense all of this into one slide here. What we wanted to convey is there are many strengths in the community that will support how you move forward, and there's some barriers that we identified. In terms of the strengths, the last one I think highlights it. There's more strengths and expertise and care in the Benton County community than I can fit on a single slide. That I picked up in talking to you, in what you presented, what you emailed, people calling me with information. It's just phenomenal what I call the high level of enriched compassion for humanity that exists here. And I wanted to highlight that because assessments do what? They talk about deficits and how you address the deficits. A strength-based approach, you look at what's working and how to build on that to address the deficits. So some of the things we found include diverse community engagement, feedback, justice system stakeholders, communication in the process, and cooperation, a very strong knowledge base about what works. And that wasn't only from folks we talked to from the university. Most of the community meetings I was at from day one, people asked, are you going to look at evidence-based practices? Are you going to look at what works? The research. Have you thought about what happens for people with behavioral health issues? The things that I spent my career developing and understanding were brought up as I met in a community group at a cafe somewhere and heard that repeatedly during the process. Engagement and collaborative problem solving. Big piece of what's helpful in moving forward. You have resources to help guide implementation, and by that, meaning the Board of County Commissioners, the leadership, the university, when you're looking at evaluating the implementation of this, its effectiveness, expertise, community knowledge, a lot to harness here to continue to build on the momentum that's been created. In terms of some system and community barriers to the goal that you just saw, limited community-based substance abuse and mental health treatment capacity based on what the need is. And specifically for people who are caught up in the criminal justice system. What we've seen at GOBI in our work around the state and even nationally is, unfortunately, the criminal justice system has become a surrogate mental health facility. And those officials are trying to catch up quickly on what works best with that population. It's a mix match. You don't heal from mental health issues in there. But if they aren't addressing some things, returning to the community without that support does what? Revolving door. Creates a revolving door. No community-based facilities to address behavioral issues and capacity, and no space for programs. How many of you have toured the jail? Okay. If you haven't, please do. Please see what's there. What was built to be a short-term facility. Please take a look at it. Court law enforcement services and jail facilities are in poor condition and have serious operational deficits or deficiencies. Limited or no programs for rehabilitation, although there are some evidence-based. Definitely the drug court is a prime example of trying to provide services, a very effective program, highly skilled people doing that. We need to expand more the types of services people receive. And limited access and assessments, not access, but use of assessments for offenders' risk. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and why that's important. We're moving into the crime rate, which I pass the baton over to Carl.
Yes, it does work. Thanks, Ari. I know I see a lot of familiar faces, so I know a lot of you have seen much of the data we've presented in the past. We've looked at a lot of information, looked at a lot of different dimensions of the justice system, and it all is boiled down into the report, which you can obviously review at your leisure. What we've tried to do here tonight is just pull out some of the highlights, some of the real key indicators which kind of boil down what the issues are that you're facing and maybe point the way toward how you may want to address these issues. So Benton County has a high crime rate. Among all Oregon counties, the rate here ranks 6th in the entire state. That's crimes reported to the police as collected by the Oregon State Police. When we look at counties that you compare yourselves to, Lane, Lincoln, Lynn, Polk, Yamhill, Benton County is substantially higher in terms of reported offenses per 1,000 people. Lane also has a high rate, but if you look at the other counties, Benton County's about a 30% higher crime rate than those other jurisdictions. Interestingly, although you have one of the highest crime rates in the state, your district attorney staffing is very low. Again, Lane is perhaps an outlier here, but if you compare Benton to Lynn, Polk, Yamhill, Lincoln counties, the number of staff, deputy district attorneys per 1,000 population is below staffing levels in the other jurisdictions. And that has a variety of impacts, particularly as the office is looking at taking on more responsibilities, reviewing body cam video. It's very difficult for them to continue processing cases through at the rate which an efficient justice system expects and anticipates. So this is an issue. The jail, undersized, as Ari had mentioned. This is an incarceration rate per 1,000 people. So Benton County's is 0.69. That is about the lowest I've seen in the nation. And we've reviewed jails all over the country. The national average for county jails is 2.69, I believe, per 1,000 people. So way below the national average. These, again, are your peer counties. And, again, nobody even close to the incarceration rate that you have here in Benton County. So what does that lead to? So you have limited beds in your jail. We have a high crime rate. So what happens? Law enforcement has to arrest people. They need to be detained. There's no space. One response to that issue is forced release. This is the number of people released early from the jail from 2014 to 2018. And you can see in 2016 it really takes off to, in the past year, in 2018, over 400 individuals released early from the jail because they had to be released to make room for other offenders coming in the front door. It also has an impact on law enforcement. Over 1/3 of the arrests made in Benton County by the Corvallis Police Department and the Sheriff's Office result in a citation and release. And I believe law enforcement will tell you that they don't feel comfortable with that level of people not being placed in custody. That's a very high rate of people being arrested for suspected or chargeable criminal offenses and then being released. Typically, around the cite and release is a common policy, and if used in a judicious manner, it's a valuable tool. But it's very rare to see a jurisdiction with rates in excess of 10 or 15%. This is definitely an outlier. Another impact, because, again, there's no space in the jail, there's no consequences for defendants who fail to show up for a court hearing. Jail beds have to be preserved for those offenders that represent a very serious threat to the public. So a person doesn't show up for a court hearing, there's really no recourse to put him in jail because those beds aren't available. So as a result, you see in 2017, 16% of defendants failed to appear for scheduled court hearings. Around the country, what we see is like minimally acceptable is a rate of around 5%. So you're around triple the national accepted rate of people who fail to show up for court hearings. So this is an extraordinarily high rate, and it contributes to inefficiency in court processing. leads to disregard for the integrity of the justice system. If people can just disregard court orders to show up for court, it's a major issue. So, in facilities. The courthouse, I mean, it's a beautiful facility, but it needs to be replaced. It's not survivable if you ever had an earthquake here. It's the oldest courthouse in Oregon. It was probably met the need at one time, but that day has long passed. Aside from its structural integrity issues, it's not designed to accommodate the amount of work that goes through that facility currently. You've got public safety issues, offenders and public and staff all share common areas. There's no attorney-client conference rooms. It's very crowded. There's no handicapped accessibility. And it's about undersized by about 45%, we would say, based on the amount of work that goes on in that facility. So its time has passed. The jail itself is in very poor condition. Building systems are failing on a continual basis, plumbing, electrical. The facility lacks physical space to provide any rehabilitative programs, such as mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, education. There's no space. They can't be done. The structure itself is deteriorating and is going to provide an unsafe environment for both staff and inmates going forward. Partially because of the lack of space in the jail, you don't have any meaningful rehabilitation programs to really address the risks of the people that are coming through the justice system. So there's no programs in place to assess offender needs and risks to reoffend. There's no evidence-based programming to address their risks to reoffend. No transitional programming to facilitate reentry, such as work release or electronic monitoring or day reporting. No intermediate sanctions for low-risk offenders. So again, you're not making the best use of the few jail beds that you have because you're not addressing the needs of those offenders as they're cycling through your system. What a lot of jurisdictions will tell you is that if you get people in jail, that's the time when you have a captive audience, so to speak. So you can actually do things with them. You can actually implement programs, and you can make a difference. But you're wasting an opportunity here because you don't have the ability to really intervene and make a difference in their lives. Previous jail assessments basically have come to the same conclusions that we have. So everything that we have seen is basically consistent with what past studies have indicated. The jail is a significant issue. The court has a significant issue. The lack of programs are significant issues. These are common themes and not a surprise. So, opportunities for improvement. What we see in the four areas that I already described, prevention, enforcement, justice, and accountability, these are the areas we see where you can really make a difference and really advance your system in a significant way. In the prevention side, expand community mental health treatment, expand community substance abuse treatment, and look at transitional housing options for the homeless, particularly people coming out of the justice system with no place to go. That can make a significant impact on people who are at risk to enter the justice system and perhaps steer them in a different direction. On the enforcement side, you need policies that assure public safety and offender accountability. And what that means is that if police arrest somebody for a serious offense, they should be at least booked into the jail and reviewed for their potential risk to the public. They shouldn't be cited and released. You shouldn't let the lack of jail space affect public safety, and that's what you're in danger of doing right now with the policies that you have in place because you have insufficient jail space. And you need facilities that support effective operations. The Law Enforcement Services Center has issues. It's not an optimal facility for current police operations, and it certainly won't be going forward. The 911 operation, again, is compromised in some cases by their space in the building as well. Justice. Courts need safe and efficient facilities. We've talked about the problems at the courthouse and adequate staff resources, particularly as it relates to the district attorney's office. On the accountability and rehabilitation side, again, this is a constant theme. You've heard us talk about it. You need sufficient capacity in your correctional system to support law enforcement and court needs so that people who need to be incarcerated are incarcerated. And if they're in jail, they need to receive the programming based on their risk and their needs. They're two complementary pieces of the program. And you need those programs to be evidence-based to reduce recidivism. There's been a lot of research, and Ari's going to talk about that in a little bit, but this is not an unknown area. There's been a lot of work done on what works, particularly for offenders going through county justice systems. So there's a knowledge base out there that you can take advantage of and can use to improve your system here. Ari?
Thank you, Carl. I think am I back on? I just want to make sure the sound, it is. Okay, great. Benton County Jail offender needs. In addition to the hard data, we wanted to look at what are some of the underlying issues of offenders in the system. And we found that there isn't a single place to go and collect that. So one of the areas and suggestions that you'll see in follow-up is expanding data collection and better understanding of people entering the system. What are some of their needs? There's no standard assessment tool that's used at the jail to capture that, even though there are many normed ones in the nation. We do know from looking at the percentage of all prescription costs at the jail that 30% were for psychotropic medications. Those are to treat things like bipolar, schizophrenia. They're also more costly drugs, so they would have a higher rate among them. But it gives you a sense that the need is there. To what extent and what are specific issues to help direct treatment towards, you need to collect more information. One of the things we did was look at offenders who are in the Norcor facility because they have a mental health unit there where treatment is provided and they collect quite a bit of data. And when they looked at the risk to reoffend, and these are Benton County individuals who are in that facility, and they took a snapshot of a day and looked at risk to reoffend on the tool that they use there. Out of 111 individuals, 18 were low, 71 were medium, and 22 were high risk to reoffend. It's really key in best practices to match responses to level of intensity. So the higher the risk, the more intense the response should be. What the research shows is if you do too much with low-risk offenders, they will commit more crimes when they leave. If you do too little with high-risk offenders, they will commit more crimes. If you match the response to the intensity is where you get that biggest outcome on reduced victimizations. So knowing who's high, medium, and low is key in that. Also, when we look at those who were referred to different kinds of programs, we found information on 24 from mental health services, for example, 5 on the mental health unit, and some of those repeat. They might be in different ones. Other programs might include substance abuse treatment. So it's a way to start to look at need, but certainly we found in the assessment the need to have more of that information, to have data-driven decision-making for your future implementation. We wanted to offer up, because GOBI does a lot of this, as I said, around the state and even the nation, in looking at people and the prevalence of mental health issues for individuals in the correction system. And nationally, what we know about local jails, it's about 64% of all of those lodged there have some type of mental health issue, a diagnosis. PTSD, anxiety, depression, bipolar, schizophrenia is what I mean by those, 64%. When we look at serious mental health conditions, in the general population, that's about 12%. In the jails, it's closer to 22. High prevalence. We also see from national data on a study that was done with the jail population of how many people there had substance abuse problems, and that was close to half. We looked at offenders who had had exposure to trauma. The relationship between unresolved trauma and negative acting out is very high. We see it with people with mental illness, have trauma in their history, as children grow up and experience it as adults when it's unresolved. People in the correctional system who are also using a lot of drugs, as we saw, to numb things, self-medicating, have a history of traumatic event. So this one snapshot of 2,122 individuals asked how many people had ever had lifetime exposure to trauma as it was defined by physical or sexual abuse, and how many were currently, not in the jail currently, but it was experienced in their life at the time, here and now. And as you can see, the prevalence rate are very, very high. For women, the experience over the lifetime was 96%, almost everybody. Men, 90%. So that relationship's important to understand. Why? Because if we're trying to reduce crime, we want to respond in ways that addresses what's going on and exasperates that acting out. Not because I'm touting, oh, just bring everyone to treatment, it'll be great. No, just lock everyone up and it'll be great. Nope. You have to combine the two. I always say the dating's over, it's time for the marriage. You've heard me say that. Maybe too much. I'm going to get at home why. I keep that video hidden. No. So I akin this to this. What if we were, have you all heard me talk about working on the maternity ward at the hospital as an analogy? So if we were all on a maternity ward, and would you ever think this would happen? You think someone would come up to you on the maternity ward, we're all highly seasoned staff on a maternity ward, and someone comes up and says, well, why are those women screaming? Well, because they're in pain. So why are people cycling out of a system without doing better? Why are people cycling in and out of the jail? Why are they cycling in and out of the ER and not getting better? Not the whole population, but a subgroup. Because they're driven by things that are rooted in a lot of complication, and trauma is part of that. It's important to look at social determinants of health when addressing crime. I have a lot of different ways of explaining this, but I don't think anyone said it better than the individual at the local jail who I interviewed as part of this, talking to people with lived experiences. When I said to him, not his personal story, but I said, overall, why do you think people get caught up in the jail, and what would help them to not commit crimes? And he's talked about, first of all, the amount of substance abuse that people are involved in. And he said, this is one of the few times I'm completely sober. I'm off of drugs because they're not in the jail. It's a forced detox. And with that comes this moment of clarity. It's a window of opportunity with people who have addiction issues, where they start to look at, how have I hurt people in my life? What am I doing? How am I shackled to this behavior? I'm not going to drink while you're driving to the bar. I'm not going to use while you're tying up. A moment of clarity happens in the jail. But, he said, when I leave here, if I try to get a job, it is very difficult with a record. And one gentleman even said, I wish I had the education to talk to you clearer about this. Just highlighting that education attainment was a problem. And then said, and if I wanted to get a house, affordable housing being a difficult issue, no doubt, but with a record, so stressors happen quickly, decomposition from that stability that was achieved while incarcerated decomposes very quickly. And what's the first and easiest thing to do? Go hang out with the friends I used to hang out with, and they're using, and they're... So social determinants of health around employment, around education, around a place to live, around how to have stability in your life, to implement all the things you're learning in treatment, if you have exposure to it, are a key combination. I want to talk to you a little bit about the input we heard in the community meetings, the forums, the workshops, off the surveys, talking to folks over the cotton candy. We asked a similar set of questions, and then follow-up questions depended on what we heard in those meetings. But we asked them about their vision for an effective criminal justice system. What do they consider important elements of treatment, if any? What would help repeat offenders? Have they seen the jail, toured it? Were they familiar with Matrix? Those kinds of questions. The survey has more questions, and that's also in the report. I'm giving a lot of tease. Ooh, I got to go home and read this. Honey, when we get home, turn on the computer and pull up that report. I would if I was sitting in your chair. Hence is why my family says, Mom, social life is a really good thing. You may want to look at that sometime. But at some point, I hope you do go through it and see more of the responses. I'm going to hit some highlights, given the time and this forum we have tonight. Originally, GOBI was asked to help facilitate 3 community forums and 3 workshops. And without expanding the contract with Benton County, what we said was, in the operations team or the steering committee planning this, was there's going to be a lot of people we're going to miss because they can't get to one of those 6 events. And there's a whole group of people who don't come to community meetings. They're working at night. They have child care issues. They're exhausted from 2 jobs. You all made an extra effort to be here. People who are juggling even more, it's harder. So we instead decided to expand that to 22 community events, and we're able to reach out to about 614 people. The themes in the feedback was to focus on that continuum, the full range of the intercepts. Look at what works. Had more people in this community talk to a researcher about evidence-based practice. I thought groupies. I'm so happy here. Consider the needs of the victims. You hear a lot about the conversations of offenders, what's happening in their lives, and there's the needs of the victims and community safety in that. Look at both. Treatment for offenders. A lot of the community members here talked about the need for mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, housing. They went right to that. Reintegration into the community, once leaving the jail, for example, and services for people with mental illness and substance abuse. Those are highly often feedback on these topics. Very often receive this feedback. Also, a high frequency of responses were considering, what about housing? What about employment? That came up quite a bit from the community members. Services for high-risk juvenile offenders. People ask, what are you doing for people, young people who are aging out of that system and headed towards the adult? Your data shows that that's a very, very small group in Benton. It's one of the smallest in the state. I had 17 years of research in juvenile justice, and I don't know that I'd seen it that successful. They have a system that uses every element in evidence-based practices. Assess risk, respond with treatment, make sure the treatment matches the risk. There's probably a lot of other reasons why it's working so well, but I have done studies of those in the juvenile who age into the adult in other communities. You could follow up with that in part of your evaluation if you all are interested. Training for law enforcement. If we know people are acting out and have mental illnesses, substance abuse, agitating the behavior, does law enforcement know how to respond? And you have a nationally known training for your law enforcement here. So that is in place. This is a quick snapshot of some of the comparison here. So the responses in blue are from the community forum where people voted that night. They had instant polling and they clicked on which they preferred. And the other is from survey responses from people primarily at the fair. 2 different populations. Having been in both of those, I know there wasn't a big crossover, very few. And yet, the responses hovered so closely together. You can see that balance of corrections and treatment. 66% of the people said that's what we want, no matter where they were asked, what venue. Formal one like this with clickers or the survey. Very small percentage, 2% in both arenas, and in every conversation said just lock people up. Very few said just provide treatment. The support for that balance is, of course, very high and repeated consistently in the community engagement. More on crime prevention, 12 to 24%. We need to ask a lot more people to tease out what that is. But I'm going to go back for a minute. In the survey, you'll see there, and it's not in the slides here, but there are also questions about how do you feel about your local law enforcement? What grade would you give them? A, B, C, D. You got to give a grade on the written forms. And there's very high marks there, and the comments are all in the report. I find them respectful, consistent. I've interacted with them too much. They're starting to get annoyed with me, when one person said. But a lot of praises for the respectful professional responses from law enforcement. They were also asked to grade the local jail. That didn't receive as high of a grade. And when you read the comments on why, the comments said it's too small, space is inadequate, the staff are doing the best they can, but it's falling apart around them. So they were grading the physical facility, not what happens there. from community members. Unprompted, they didn't have all this background, and they didn't listen to me and Carl. Just offered up. I don't think it's an adequate space. Responses from members of ethnic minority communities and advocacy groups. This is where the data is a little bit different, and the feedback's a little bit different. Smaller in number, yet consistently with concerns about how much of what is happening locally, concerns/questions, how much of what is happening locally is happening in Benton County? And you get, I'm sorry, nationally. I said locally. Thank you, Commissioner. How much of the national issues that ethnic minority communities are dealing with exist in your local community? And there's a full range of responses to that. None, yeah. So you don't have the data to really talk about that. And one of the suggestions is including in the evaluation a parity study to collect that, so you can see, one, if it is there, and two, if yes, where and how, so you can respond appropriately, and if not, you can talk about what's working better. The other piece that we learned and really heard was those members from your community feel disconnected from this momentum of information and collection and assessment and planning. And to bridge that, to bring those voices closer would be important, if not critical. You learn a lot from that whole process with each other during implementation. How's my pace? How's what's going on here? Good? Sometimes I have people hold up their hands, 5. I'm so glad I did this tonight. 1 would be, I should have gone home and babysat my sister's 2-year-old. So let's see some hands. 5, I'm so glad. 1, and please, if it's a 1, use your index finger. I have a high tolerance for rejection. It is not that high. So how's this going for you? Because I'll switch it around if I'm losing you. Okay, pretty good. Good. Helpful? Okay. What works to reduce crime? Again, great section in here. Another part I'd run home and read. 60 years of 40, 60 years working on evidence-based practices and identifying what consistently helped to reduce crime, what consistently caused it to increase in our correction system. What's key about the research is it's not based on a single study. It's not based on 4 or 5. It's based on over 400 meta-analysis of all those studies. They do a certain statistical methodology to tease out what's most effective and what exasperates offending. Very strong research. So what they found in that is there are factors linked to people reoffending, and I list those are the big 8 up there: criminal thinking, antisocial peers, multiple failures at school and work, not involved in pro-social activities, criminal thinking is a big one, substance abuse, others. And individuals with more of these factors in an assessment tool that really teases it out are more likely to reoffend. High probability. Not 100%, no tool will ever have that, but much higher than our normal, what do we think about looking at this crime and what do we think will happen in the future. So effective responses need to balance corrections responses like pretrial release programs, electronic monitoring, the use of jail, probation and parole, drug court, which is a mix of corrections and treatment, of course. So those kinds of responses should be mixed with treatment that addresses those underlying issues and provided in an intensity that matches risk. It's what you'll read in 25, 30 pages. I know you all are like, oh, maybe I can get that. Best practices, it's not up to one agency. You need a partnership among, if those issues exist, you need a partnership among the experts working in corrections, law enforcement, the courts, the DA's office, probation and parole, mixed with the treatment aspect. People in the treatment world, mental health, substance abuse, understand how to help with a thinking errors class, role-playing, skill building, education component, that those are mixed. Treatment and rehabilitation goes together. And accountability. Something happened, harm was done, regardless of all of the history and underlying There needs to be some kind of restoration in the community. Those are all best practices. And one of the strong pieces of what I have just shared with you is that completely aligns with what the community members said they want. That high support for corrections and treatment. And what the research says are a link, direct match. It'd be different if I heard a lot of different things from community members. I was thinking, wow, how would I present that? Well, I don't have to. They echoed the research. They represented it. Stewards of it, actually, in community meetings. We are headed into the different scenarios.
So, with everything that we had gleaned from our research, from observing the system, from what we heard from the community, what we wanted to do is put together some different scenarios for how you may all respond to improving and addressing the issues that we raised in the report. There's all kinds of different ways you can approach this. We tried to look at the three most logical alternatives that laid out essentially in terms of their fundamental approach. So the first scenario is essentially what we heard most from the community, what you valued, what you thought needed to be in a justice system, supported by best practices, by what works in other communities, by what works in other systems. So this would be the scenario which essentially reflects what we were told you want to see in a justice system that works. So on the prevention side, community mental health and substance abuse treatment, a new respite crisis center for people with mental illness that may need to have a short-term intervention to address behavioral issues. Often these people end up in the justice system currently. If there is an alternative community-based type of placement that can be made available, that can divert them from jail perhaps, or hospitals or other facilities. A sobering center, again, similar type of issue. People who are inebriated often end up in the emergency room or the jail. They don't necessarily need to be there. They're not necessarily a risk to anybody other than themselves. A community center which addresses provides a safe place for them to sober up is an approach that many communities have implemented, and it relieves pressure on both the justice system and the public health system. On law enforcement, a new law enforcement center. We talked a little bit about some of the inadequacies in the current law enforcement center, so we replaced that facility. A very significant issue is reducing the use of cite and release to 15%, and this is a level that was suggested by both the Chief of Police in Corvallis and the Benton County Sheriff as a level of cite and release that they felt comfortable would protect public safety and assure that people that didn't need to be in the jail had an alternative to go. Programs to divert and to enhance the justice system. Pretrial services, electronic monitoring, these are alternatives that provide an evidence-based means for assessing individuals' risk to the community, and if they don't need to be in jail, they don't have to be in jail. They can be supervised by probation. They can be put on electronic monitoring. Work release, similar type of issue. You put a person in work release, they can maintain ties to the community. They can maintain employment. They can maintain relations with their families. All these are factors which are shown to help people adjust to or respond to issues in their lives and keep them out of the justice system. You want to update the offender classification system. So again, you're giving law enforcement staff the tools they need to assess risk and assess need and assess programs needs for offenders coming through the system. And if you assess needs, you need the in-custody treatment programs that will address the issues that these people have. In this scenario, we think you need a 112-bed jail. We'll show you how we get to that number on the next slide. New courthouse, we've talked about the need for a new facility there. And we need to lower the failure to appear rate for people in the court processing. Also in the courts, we would recommend, not immediately, but over time, phased over a 10-year period at least, 7 additional deputy district attorneys to address with workload issues in that office. We need treatment programs in jail, mental health, substance abuse treatment. a restorative justice program for offenders as they reenter the community to help them rebuild those connections and help victims of crime come to terms with what's happened to them. Restorative justice programs have been shown to be very effective in other communities. We think Benton County would benefit from one as well here. Reentry to community-based treatment, again, continuing, if you get good treatment in the jail, you want to be able to transition to an effective treatment alternative in the community, so you continue that continuum. And then, as we mentioned earlier, transitional housing support for people who come out of the justice system and need a place to stay. So this represents the universe of what we heard and what we saw needed to be addressed. In addition to this, we think you need to increase your capacity to collect data so you can evaluate the effectiveness of your programs, and if need be, make adjustments to make them more effective going forward. Training for law enforcement staff and correctional staff and treatment staff, and creation of a Citizens Advisory Council to ensure that you have, on an ongoing basis, the type of communication and interaction between the public and justice system stakeholders to ensure that community viewpoints are reflected in how the justice system operates. So those are the basic elements that go into scenario one. So what that means in terms of a jail population and the impact of these programs is summarized here. So we projected out the jail population to 2040, and we see essentially, it's cut off on these, but it grows to around 96 offenders on an average basis over the next 22 years. What we do then, though, is, again, we recommend you eliminate forced release. We eliminate matrix release. We recommend you reduce citation and release to 15%. All these policies have the effect of increasing your jail population. So eventually, if you do these things, that base jail population increases from around 96 to around 130, I believe. But then what happens is the programs that you've indicated need to be put in place kick in, and they lower that population. So you can see, and again, I apologize, you can't see the impacts on these screens necessarily, but the sobering center, transitional housing, pretrial services, electronic monitoring, all these programs have an impact in reducing that average daily population to the point where you get it down to, I believe, like 98 offenders on an average daily basis. To manage that level of population, you need essentially about a 15% hedge to cover classification differences. You need to keep certain types of offenders separate. The population will fluctuate, and we take into account, looking historically, how often your population goes up, and you need to be able to house for those peaks as well. So you need basically about 15% on top of the average daily population, which in this case is about 16 beds. Basically, it corresponds to, you need, if you do all these things, make these changes in policy, normal population growth, implement these programs, you need a jail of about 112 beds. And what we would see this laying out as is you need a jail with a mental health unit, a female unit, a maximum security unit, and then 2 general population units, and that would be how you get to your 112 beds. Scenario number 2. Now, in this scenario, we basically focus on investing in prevention and de-emphasize programs that are housed in the justice system. So essentially, you have all the same prevention programs here. That's number 1, isn't it? Oh, it would help if I hit the right button. I went back instead of forward. Okay, yes, here's the cost. Okay, cost of what scenario 1 entails. So in this, we break out, and you got handouts because I know this is very difficult to see. Capital cost, debt service, annual cost upon full implementation, and then a 20-year cost. 20 years because that's typically the term for a bond that would be put out to support the capital construction. So it gives you a total 20-year cost of capital, debt service, and annual operation. So you get the total picture of what all these elements cost. So we break it up by prevention, justice, accountability, and rehab, and then system support. You can see the big ticket items on there obviously are the capital cost. The courthouse at $31.2 million, the law enforcement center at $26.5, and the 112-bed jail at $22.7. Capital cost for just those facilities and the work release center at around $83 million. The total cost, 20 years over this package, is about $212 million. On the operating side, what we do is in looking at the jail, we net out the current monies that are being allocated to the jail currently for its operations and for the money you spend at Norcor for housing inmates there. So this is the net amount in addition to what's already, the county's already spending on jail services. So, and you can see the annual full cost of implementation on the operating side is about $10.7 million. So again, a total cost of around $212 million to do everything in this package. Yes?
So you will be saving $5 million if you go with scenario 1. Is that correct? The current annual jail spending estimated at $5 million.
That's $5 million on top of that.
On top of that.
Yes. Yeah, because the current jail is only 40 beds. So you're going to 112 beds, so it's more staff, more inmates. So no, it's more expensive. The second scenario is investing in social services. So on the prevention side, basically the same thing you saw in scenario 1. We continue the policy of reducing cite and release. This is going to result in a 144-bed jail, and we'll see how we get to that number. Again, we put a new courthouse in here. We lower the failure to appear rate. 7 additional deputy district attorneys in the restorative justice program, and some reentry. Same in terms of data support, evaluation, and the Citizens Advisory Council. Now here, the assumptions in terms of the base jail population remain the same. Population growth, the same assumptions. The same impact for forced release, eliminating matrix release, lowering cite and release, same impacts. Here, though, the prevention programs do not have as much of an impact on the jail population as the justice-based system programs do. So they only lower the population to about 123 on an average daily basis. Then you put the 15% on top of that to give you the buffer you need for management. That results in the 144-bed jail. So a substantially larger facility. If you look at the cost is somewhat less, and the significant cost savings here is this takes out the Law Enforcement Services Center. So that reduces the capital cost in this scenario substantially. The jail, because it's larger, again, it's more expensive. It's a $29 million facility. The operations are a little bit more expensive as well. The cost of the prevention programs is the same as what you saw in scenario 1. We simply take out all the programs on the justice and accountability side. Total cost in this package is $174 million. The third scenario is the logical alternative to what you just saw in prevention. This invests just in programs on the justice side and doesn't do the investments in prevention. So again, we keep the same policies in place. We don't have any of the community programs that we have under Intercept 0 there. Instead, we have the programs that were in scenario 1, but in the justice system. This scenario results in a 120-bed jail. And again, these are the similar throughout. The 120-bed jail, this is how we get to that. Again, it's the same assumptions on the base population, the impact of policies, but you can see more of an impact on those justice system-based programs, pretrial services, electronic monitoring, the work release center. They tend to have a larger impact on the jail population than the prevention programs based in the community that we saw earlier. So this gets the average daily population down to about 103 inmates. And then, again, with your 15% classification and population fluctuation factor, results in the need for a 120-bed jail. This cost, again, the difference here, you see the different costs for the jail because of the different size of the jail. We take out all the prevention program costs above, add back in the program costs for the justice, accountability, and rehabilitation programs. Total cost of this scenario is about $153 million. And again, this does not have the law enforcement center in it. So again, that accounts for the largest significant difference between the cost of this scenario and scenario 1. This compares essentially the three scenarios. So you can see, again, 20-year cost for scenario 1 was $212 million, scenario 2, $174 million, and then scenario 3, $153 million, I believe. And you can see the assumptions. We keep the same assumptions on site and release and FTAs across the board. Community programs in scenarios 1 and 2, justice programs in scenario 3 and 1, and you see the different jail capacities associated with each scenario. So, next steps.
My turn to juggle the technology. As we mentioned the last time we were here, there are a couple of significant factors that might affect our next steps. One of those is that the Council on State Governments Justice Group is doing a consulting project with the state of Oregon at the state's invitation, with the participation of the Oregon Association of Counties and others, on the behavioral health needs of people within the criminal justice system here. They have about 12 counties participating in terms of contributing our county jail data, and they are matching that up to the data from the DHS databases for people that are in the treatment system, so that we can get a much better snapshot for what those behavioral health and mental health needs are without running into the HIPAA privacy issues that we run into sometimes when we try to do that locally. Based on that snapshot, the intent is to put forth new programming at the state level or legislation that might support additional programming at the county level. What I'm hearing is that they're talking about a grants program that we would be eligible to apply for to help with some of the programming on the behavioral health and mental health side to address the needs of inmates at the county level. So we are going to be watching this very carefully, looking forward to what might emerge. Commissioner Hall from Lincoln County is the commissioner on that task force at the state level, and we are working closely with her. And speaking of Commissioner Hall, we have been working at a very, very preliminary level with Lincoln County, talking about the potential for shared jail. They have needs there for a mental health unit in particular, but they're also looking for a place for sentenced inmates to be where they have space for programming and can potentially share all of the programming that we are envisioning for a future facility for Benton County. So there's a lot of conversation left to be had there, but we're excited to start to embark upon that as we move into this year. This is a rough overview of the calendar that we are looking toward. We would hope that we might have new facilities in the ground and operating in 2024. So working backwards from there, this year we need to figure out what the governance structure will be in terms of the decision making as we move forward with the county's decisions about a mix of facilities and which partners are really going to be at the table with this as we move forward with the programs and facilities. That means basically what is the new operations team going to look like? Who is that core group going to be that is looking at putting together proposals or requests for proposals to future consultants and project managers, et cetera. We will bring on a project manager sometime soon this year to coordinate all of this. We have a complex set of tasks ahead of us, and we know that we don't have the bandwidth to do all of this in-house with current staff. We have a rough implementation plan outlined with the assistance of our current consulting team, Ari and Carl, and it has several elements to it. One is that governance element I already mentioned, a financial or fiscal plan for funding this endeavor, facilities plans, programs and services, and then community engagement and communication. One of the things we know after engaging in this process for the last year is that part of what's made it successful is getting all of the community input going, being proactive, going out to community groups and talking to people where they are and making sure that we're not missing people. And if there are people that aren't showing up at our meetings that we know matter in this discussion, we're not going to let them not be there. We're going to go find you. So we do know that there are several things that we can do in the near term that will give us bang for the buck, that are not as big a reach, or that will help inform our facilities planning moving forward. Some of those are to embark upon, for instance, a pretrial services program, so we can use those calibrated tools that Ari was referring to assess risk and need, and get a better sense for the needs of our inmate population, document that, and then start planning programs and facilities based on that data rather than on guesswork. We have much more than guesswork now based on this document and the assessment that's been done, but we have a ways to go to refine that. Evaluation. We want to make sure that we start now laying the groundwork for collecting the data to evaluate what we do and the new programs that we put into place, so that we can know what works and tweak it as we need to, make adjustments, make sure that we are being, as we said we wanted to be, efficient, effective, and equitable. That endeavor is going to take partnerships. Hopefully we'll be able to work with the folks in sociology department here at Oregon State or up at Western Oregon University to do that evaluation, put together a plan, and move that forward. We are very interested in the idea of a sobering center. We know that Samaritan Health Services is also interested, and we hope to build momentum around that, do further investigation and research, see what other counties are doing that's been successful so far, and figure out how a sobering center might work here in Benton County. We know that we'd like to have a Citizens Advisory Council. The Corvallis Police Department has that type of a body already. The Benton County Sheriff's Office doesn't. We'd like to see where that kind of an advisory body might fit as we move forward, especially to be able to integrate in views of folks that are less represented in these fora and members of our minority community, but also to just address policy and strategy issues with respect to law enforcement. We also want to, as we move forward in our work this next year and into 2020, think about the scalability of our work. If the question of partnering with Lincoln County is a big if, we want to make sure that what we do works for us, but that it can be scaled up if we have Lincoln County as a partner, scaled back, that we've got the right governance agreements in place to work with them, and that whatever we do moving forward, and whether it's courthouse, law enforcement center, or jail, that we're thinking about the future so that 20 years from now we're not having the same discussion, but that we've already thought about how we can expand if we need to, or how we can be most effective in using our space when we do have additional population and need. So much of the same work is going to continue into 2020. We are thinking about our timeline in the context of the local operating levy that funds our current jail bed contract and much of our criminal justice system work. That levy will expire, I get my dates right, it's a 5-year levy, 2017-2022. So that's kind of the timeline we're looking at for floating a bond and the next local operating levy, which we would envision as being the levy that would fund the new system moving forward. So we have work to do to identify the right project management approach and then to hire the team that will design and build these facilities. And we have to decide which facilities and which approach we want to take. So we will be working internally in the next few weeks to come to a plan, and we will bring that out again to the Board of Commissioners and make sure that we are engaging with all of you as we make those decisions. What is clear is that we would like to be able to pursue the scenario one, the evidence-based approach. We know that it has the most expensive price tag. We know that we may not be able to afford everything that we want. So we would like to start working from there and really get a little more specific about space needs, potential sites, one thing and another, and see what the real world costs beyond the initial estimates might be, and then start figuring out where we need to economize, what our top priorities are, what we absolutely must have in terms of facilities, what we must have in terms of the nature of those facilities as we move forward. So the project implementation plan is a big Gantt chart with a lot of interdependencies, and we will be working to flesh that out over the next few weeks. There'll be detailed tasks associated with each of those areas. I think I've spoken about most of this already without going through these slides, so I'm not going to go into any of these in detail, other than to say that we have a lot of coordination to do and a lot of proactive work to do to make sure that we make the right decisions. And we want to be able to deliver the best project we can on time and on budget, and not overbuild for what the community needs. We also, on the facilities side of things, know that we want to, we would prefer to, put it that way, have a campus-based approach to be the most efficient. Have a courthouse and a jail facility and a new law enforcement building, if we choose to go with that, all on one site. Where all of our justice system professionals could work together and continue to work in a close partnership the way they do now with our downtown-based capacity. We have a lot of decisions to make in this arena about exactly which facilities we're going to build, property acquisition, and making sure that we have those facilities designed most appropriately for the community. With respect to programs and services, we know a lot about what works. We need to figure out how best to deliver those programs to the right people that are at risk of getting involved in the criminal justice system. And that's a challenge. So we are going to have to work carefully and closely to make sure that we understand who those people are that go through our systems on a revolving door basis, and how best we can target our programs to those people that are in highest need. We are going to have to work more closely together as separate departments within the county when it comes to these issues, and across agencies. We have an entity here in the county, the Willamette Criminal Justice Council. It is the group that served as the model for the statewide network of local public safety coordinating councils. That body will be important as we move forward and try to put flesh on these bones of the recommendations in this report. We are going to take off and start our work first with focus on pretrial services to improve our data collection and hopefully to do a better job of prioritizing who is in the jail. Working on potential for sobering center with community partners on data collection, evaluation, and with that community advisory council. So as we move into implementation, oops.
It's a subliminal message.
We would like to hear from you. We'd like to know what we should be thinking about as we move into implementation. What have we missed? What questions do you still have? And what current strengths do we have that support us moving to this next phase? Anyway, I'd like to open that up. I'm going to pass the mic to Ari. We'll probably take turns answering questions and pass the baton back and forth.
Thank you, Commissioner. So we do want to open it up for what you're thinking. Those questions on there were just to help turn some gears. It could be that you want to talk about something that was on the flashing subliminal message screen. What are your thoughts about implementation? Who should we be talking to? What do you think some of the strengths are that will help? What do you think are some of the challenges? If you're thinking of challenges, do you have ideas on what we should do to address them? So we don't get a list of venting why it will be hard, but have a balanced response of, and here's what might help as it's hard. Or questions you have, other thoughts. We're just going to open it up. I think we have some people with mics. We like to use a mic so we can capture it on the recording. We ask for, of course, one speaker at a time, make space so they can be heard. And then we will try to get to all of you who have comments tonight. There's also a handout if there's something that you want to share, but don't want to share it in front of the full group or have it put on YouTube at some point. Have it put on a recording. You can write it down there, and we'll find a way to address them on the web page, questions that were collected. So, some hands up? Yes.
Hi. We're too
Yeah,
close.
crossing.
Yeah. Sorry about that. Can you all hear me? Is this working now?
Kelly?
It's not for the speaker, it's just for the recording.
Oh, okay. So I'll talk a little louder, hopefully, without blowing that out. I have a question about the plan across the board from the three scenarios to reduce the rate of site and release. Is that solely being done through expansion of just the physical capacity of the jail? Are there other things that you're going to be doing? And as a anticipated follow-up, does that take into account the fact that nationally there's growing awareness of the inequity, particularly racial inequity around the bail system, who gets bail, who's told to stay in jail, and the evolving of the bail system into back of debtor's prison?
Oh, do we have a mic for Carl? We want to put on the recording, though, unfortunately. Thank you.
The reduction in cite and release will basically result in more people being funneled into the jail. So what's real critical then is your implementation of pretrial release. So what'll happen then, you'll have more people coming into the jail, but they'll be subject to an objective evaluation process that assesses their risk to the community and then put them under some type of supervision, be it probation supervision, electronic monitoring, some type of check-in program, but it'll be done on an objective basis so that there is some assurance that if in fact the community needs to have them incarcerated, they're incarcerated. If they can be put in the community, they can be put in the community, rather than being put in the jail and then released because there's inadequate capacity. So the effort is to rationalize, if you will, the current system and make it more objective and use evidence-based processes to ensure that people who don't need to be in the jail are not in the jail. So you do that in conjunction with a reduction in citation and release, so those people get to be seen, so those decisions are made in an objective manner rather than putting all that responsibility on the officer in the field saying, I'm going to have to let this guy go because there's no space in the jail.
Did that help address your different points? Did we get to the last one on the bailing issue? Did we capture that? Because I don't want something so important to put out there and we didn't address it.
The points are mostly addressed. Maybe if you have the ability, I don't know if this is beyond your scope, to go a little bit more into, the more general inequities of the bail system. And even if I've heard some of those objective scales, they're becoming very popular, but I've heard counter arguments against them that because they're based on data from an inherently biased system, they're not as objective as maybe they could be. I don't know if that's beyond your scope, but if you can, I'd love to hear a comment on that.
It is within the scope. Actually, the whole study of the evaluation that reports on the efficacy and cost efficiencies of implementation will include a parity study. Absolutely a parity study. And so I'm familiar with the research you're talking about on those assessment tools. And they do get subjectivity put in, and sometimes based on race, ethnicity. So it's highly, highly important that they do inter-rater reliability along the way to do a check and balance around that. And the tools have been normed for gender, age, and race, ethnicity. So the predictability doesn't change on that. It changes if it's skewed by the people implementing them. And there's a check and balance to put in place to see if that's happening, and then as part of the evaluation to look into the scores different when all else is even. So we're going to proactively put that in up front. Yeah. Thank you for the question. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Yeah, excuse me. Yeah, you said you had compassion with 664 people. We can't even make a men's shelter here. We can't. Nobody wants it. One person said, let's put it in the other county. Let's put it in Lynn County, across the freeway there. And they want all these programs? I don't think so. There's two levies. Another levy. We have one coming up for 911. The city has doubled theirs. We just put $200 million in the school system. Are they going to come back for their levy? They have a levy out there. And you're talking about 9/11. We have the chief of police who's put a fee on everybody. But I have no problem with it. But we don't see these things. The ordinary people don't see them. We should have people down there taking pictures of those that we release. That's what Lane County did. They finally passed their jail thing. You know, this is all nice. Cost a lot of money. But where is the county at? The county has a property downtown. Why don't we build it downtown like most cities do? You were going to put it out in Philomath before. Nobody wants it out there. Nobody wants it. That's what's the problem. Nobody wants it in my backyard. And I don't see it coming. You know, we're Benton County. Don't we have one of the most educated people here? But yet they turn this stuff down. They don't see it in their yard. Show it to them. You talk about our Benton County being highest. I never knew any of this. Did anybody else know? No. This guy's shaking his head, but well, you know.
I worked at the jail.
Then you know what it's about. You know what it's about, right? You know what it's about. So I don't see it going anywhere, to be honest with you. Just another study, another $200,000 down the drain.
It might be, and I hope not.
I do too, but
I hope not. I
don't see anything going in
Well, I'm sorry.
2024.
Yeah.
We don't.
Yeah.
You guys got a long way to go.
It's
I won't be here to see it. I wish I would, but I'm not.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there towards the end. Certainly, the description of a big lift is well heard. I wasn't here in past assessments. I have heard limitations of them because of the single focus. Does it make a difference by expanding it? Does it make a difference by continuing to engage the community in that decision making? Will it make a difference when more people find out the kinds of things that you've said you learned tonight? I don't have that crazy 8-ball. I know if we don't do anything, the answer is no. And I know if we did our best to find out, then we find out what the response is. It is a big lift. I do echo the comment about compassion. I think the arguments we have on civic issues around the nation and certainly here are inherent in what do we do about a problem that we can't wrap our arms around and is so overwhelming we start to turn on each other. Finger pointing, the blame. Communities that have made substantial changes have a single thing in common. They say, we are the team, and the problem is what we're addressing. We are not each other's problem. And do I believe your community has the care, the insight, the compassion, the expertise, the creativity to become that team? I absolutely do. How it will play out, you and I will meet in 2014, either at the open house or crying in some, I can't say it on recording together. But if we don't, 2024, but if we don't try, the answer is no.
We tried with all of that. How many times has it been for the book?
Yeah. Understood. History has shown that there's been difficulties with this, great difficulties. Other communities have had 2, 3, 4 of the same things and then move forward. What makes that push in the next evolution of support? I hope you're part of seeing that. But we won't know until we go through it.
All right, can I speak to that as well?
Do we have
So I want to add to what you said, and very eloquently to the gentleman's comment. Voters in the past few months I've been talking to, when the jail comes up, I believe there's 2 issues who might have voted against the jail last period, what they want to look for. One, show me that the general sentiment. One, show me that what you're going to do is what you really want, and think it thoroughly. And we're doing a really good job there. The second one, exhaust all options before you go to the voters. So other options of regional or even funding from the state or federal. I think we need to tell the voters that we have exhausted all options, and at the end we're going to the voters because that's the last resort for funding.
Thank you for the additional comment. Other comments, questions, and feedback? Yes, ma'am.
Just real quickly, is there a conditional driver's permit available for alcoholics who continually get DUIs and end up having their license removed, they lose their job, and they end up paying fees to go to the classes. Can you hear me okay? And their life continually spirals downward. So I'm ignorant as to whether or not there are conditional, through the court system, conditional driver's permits for these people to get back on their feet.
Help people get around while they've had that removed. I frankly don't know the answer to that. Does someone in the room have that? Or we have a judge and a district attorney that I'm thinking no more than me.
Well, whether there is no conditional driver's permit. However, the Department of Motor Vehicles does operate a hardship permit program, and there is some eligibility for hardship permits for certain suspension offenses, and I believe DUI may be one of them. You can check. I would suggest checking with the Department of Motor Vehicles. They can give you a lot more information about that, but there is eligibility for some offenses where a license is suspended for a hardship permit, specifically for things like traveling to and from work, to and from treatment, things like that. So there isn't a specific license. That's not something the courts implement. It's something the Department of Motor Vehicles manages. The courts do play some role at times in examining or approving a request in some circumstances, but I would suggest talking to the Department of Motor Vehicles, and they'll probably give you more information about it.
Thank you.
So first, I'm Vince Adams, Corvallis School Board. First, I'd like to say, express my appreciation for the work that went into this. Thank you to the steering committee, to the county, and for the research team. This is a tremendous body of work, and it's given us a lot of clarity, so I appreciate that. I also appreciated the comments of the gentleman in the middle and then my colleague, Samuel Abdaba. My question is around return on investment. I mean, improvements in our criminal justice system should have a commensurate reduction in the rate of offenses. And so do we have any sense of what the reduction of actual offenses might be under these scenarios? And also secondary savings on operational needs, particularly in social services, you know, as a result of that reduction in crime, and can we know that with any accuracy? And I think that's going to be really helpful for voters to know what's the return on my investment, because this is a considerable ask of the community. Thank you.
Well, as we tried to project the impact of the programs, we did go to the research that's been done in terms of looking at what the impact of those programs has been in other communities in terms of reduction in crime, reduction in jail population, and that we use that information to essentially develop our estimates of what impact those programs would have. The issue you have here in terms of reducing the impact to the criminal justice system is that you're diverting you're missing so many people already through cite and release that you're going to have more people coming into the system. So you have to put in those programs just to address the normal rate of crime that's taking place in the community that the system is not currently addressing. So yes, you can put those programs in place. There is a return on there, but there's also the need to address the crime that's going on in the community, which is not being effectively addressed by the system as it's currently configured.
And to add to Carl's comments, we do have models of cost avoidance based on breaking that trajectory of chronic offending. And in the detailed plan of the implementation plan under the evaluation on the finances group area of implementation, there is a place there for the cost benefit to feed out more of that so people who are looking at it can look at those data. And it's associated with the cost of crime. We have a model that takes everything into account on that cost. The cost to the insurance, health costs to the victim. It's a national study, and we can use it as a proxy here to drill down into exactly what you're talking about.
Okay, my name is John Detweiler, and I harass a lot of people. Anyway, some nuts and bolts here for going through it. Number one, okay, these dollars are in 2018 dollars, and whoever succeeded Pat Cochran needs to know that. They're constant dollars. Okay, you need a PERT chart, not a Gantt chart. Okay, you ought to consider phasing in these facilities, not just scenarios 1, 2, and 3, which I realize is what you got now. but I think you're going to kind of want to level the load that you put on the taxpayer. And I think, and I've been saying this for quite some time, the county needs to coordinate with the city and the school board and everybody else that's putting burdens on the taxpayers. And of course, you're also competing with the notion of affordable housing, which I think we all know. I want to see my last one here. Oh yeah, and you're doing this, okay, whatever you do is going to be on the margin of what you're doing now. And you need to do net present value, internal rate of return analyses, and you need to consider, as we say, the marginal cost of capital of the county. Okay, that's all I got. Thank you.
That's great feedback.
Excellent points, and all those will have to be addressed as we go forward with implementation. That's the next level of analysis that needs to be done.
That's great comments.
Yeah, I may be looking at this a little backwards, but I'm a taxpayer. If I start, if I start looking at this, I like to look at what's my goal. Okay, let's just assume in simplified language, that's the way I talk. So our goal is to have a successful result of all this study, building things and so on. Okay, you back up and you say, well, we, in order to get that, we've got to have a budget. In order to have a budget, we got to have a plan. In order to have a plan, and it goes backwards like that. But these plans and all this engagement, I just would like to know how the plan, how you plan the plan so that you can get it to the voters in a way that they can understand it, in a way that you can phase it in. And you can't be just going to the voters for every little thing. And the commissioners, once they say this is it, certainly things are going to happen. And so would somebody help me to understand that step in this process? Thank you.
It's a challenge because we have so many moving parts and then next decision to make. But as I see it, and we have not made a formal board decision, so this is just Commissioner Ojero talking at this point, we need to move forward and hire a project manager to do the next level of analysis, drilling in on the real space needs for these facilities and programs, and to and I'm going to speak just to the facilities line at this point, and to put together better cost estimates, to look long and hard at whether we should indeed site facilities downtown on property we own or the city owns. We have to do that with the city of Corvallis, of course, and then compare that to the costs of building on a greenfield site where we don't have to relocate people, tear buildings down, deal with historic properties, one thing and another. So the that level of fiscal analysis and program and space needs planning needs to happen soon so that we can get to a conceptual design that will be just a much more solid concept for what we want to do. Then we have to take a long look at that to see whether we can afford it and scale back and pull back on what we want to go for. Only then would we go out to the voters after more engagement for that bond measure and the revised local operating levy. And after that bond, and assuming it succeeds, then we'd go into full design. And even at that point, there's another opportunity to scale back further from the biggest Cadillac that we would perhaps want to something that's more modest, and that so that we don't put too much of a strain on all of you. We all pay taxes here. We all know that our pockets aren't bottomless. Where I sit also, I know that we have facilities that are inadequate now that are going to be much more inadequate in 20 years if we don't do something about it now, and that we're better off taking care of these problems sooner before we have to do it in the aftermath of some other major natural or human-made disaster. So I would just like to keep the ball moving and keep the decisions going. Does that help?
Pretty
In order to trigger a vote, we would have to make a formal decision at the Board of Commissioners to put a bond measure on the ballot.
Okay, what's going to trigger the commissioners deciding to put it to a vote then?
We are going to continue with project management and develop a refined plan, a conceptual plan, and then take that back to the full Board of Commissioners. And but that will happen over the course of the next year and a half as we refine our facilities and program design.
Well, I don't mean to be critical. It's a difficult problem, and maybe I have to do it in steps, or it's going to take some real creativity to get it in. I mean, there's a lot involved here, and all of us agree, most of us, that there is a need. Maybe not. We don't define the need the same way, but I can just see. I'm glad I'm not a commissioner.
Well, I have to say that I'm optimistic, and I am going to keep working on this and keep the ball moving, and excited about doing so, especially working with all of you that are engaged in the process.
I have a question about the figures used here. Are the numbers for the new courthouse, new law enforcement center, and new jail, are those including a cost of acquisition of land or not?
No.
These are construction costs, right?
These are just construction and design costs.
I'm back. So to kind of address some of the undercurrent of what's going around in the room, according to the voters, I think if you want to sell this thing to the voters, you're going to have to show that they're getting their money's worth. That incentive versus punitiveness, I think, is kind of what is surfacing here, that it would prevent and create a better, safer, more healthy community. I get it that we're talking about money for buildings and structure and everything that goes on with that, but when you take that to the voters, they're going to be thinking buildings, money, bureaucracy, payrolls. Voters want to see what the outcome is going to be. And I think with the Sober Center, you know, if you guys can get that rolling in the Community Act, show some obvious, clear results of this is what your money's going to pay for. These are the results that we've set for, that, you know. Yeah.
Great feedback. Well, I think what I hear obviously echoing is good concept, but the difficulty of getting it done is a big one. And some insights into what might help, and getting more of that insights along the way is what we're going to be doing. It's not going to go from here to a vote. There's over a year of working with the community, education, getting feedback, refinement, cost benefit, evaluation, what's the outcome, how will we report to you every quarter on it. There's a lot of work in that communication and relationship building on this. Yes, sir.
I want to thank you for your efforts. I think it's a great beginning. But it seems to me, the way I think, that it would be clear we elect our judges, we elect our district attorneys, we elect the sheriff. And if this proposal contained the square footage that they felt they needed to provide the services, that I think there's a consensus in Benton County about what we'd like, but we really want to see how you're going to implement them and how much in square footage and what's it going to cost to actually do it. And I think we'd rather hear it from our elected officials, because those are the ones we get to talk to at election time all the time. And the county commissioners are organizing it, and they seem to be doing a job, but I think putting it in literally square footage and what the construction cost would be a lot clearer to most of us.
More details and who communicates those details. Thank you. We have someone up front and someone is waiting. Yes, sir.
Could you explain why we need a new law enforcement center? Is there going to be more going on there than just housing the sheriff's department and the police department?
Oh, you want to talk more about that element of it?
Yeah, the current facility has a number of issues. I mean, it's basically it houses 911, sheriff's office, probation, Corvallis Police Department. I mean, they're basically cheek to jowl in there currently. It's a poor setup internally in terms of how they operate. The building has flooding issues, So you've got the 911 center in the basement. It's subject to flooding. Emergency center, excuse me. Parking is an issue. I mean, there's a variety of different issues with the facility, and certainly if you look forward down in the future, if there's any expansion of law enforcement or a different way to configure the law enforcement services, that building is probably not going to be adequate to manage those forces. So that's what we saw when we looked at the facility. Is it manageable? Obviously, they're working with it currently. Is it ideal? Far from it. So it's a need.
There's been quite a bit of discussion on this topic in the Willamette Criminal Justice Council. The city of Albany just built a new police station. They built it lean and mean, but it's a beautiful facility that has all of the great attention to detail in terms of what a police force needs in order to operate effectively, and was built with a scalability in mind so that it would handle the increased staffing that's projected to be needed over the next 20 years. We have a lot of lessons we can learn from our sister city across the river, and I think that we will be able to work much smarter and more effectively if we have a building that meets the needs better. That said, we clearly know that the jail and the courthouse are the highest priority needs, and we are not taking it for granted that a law enforcement center is in the mix at this point in time. We'd like it to be, but we have to do those next step studies and really look hard at spaces and needs and costs and work with our partner, the city of Corvallis, to determine what happens with the law enforcement center.
Someone who's waiting with that? Yes, ma'am.
I'm Peggy Joyce, and one of the things that I've always been worried about when I've come to these meetings, and I kind of feel like I'm in my neighborhood. I see the same familiar faces here. This is cool. Is that whole issue around how are you going to get people to vote for this if they don't actually understand it? Because it's gone down, 4 or 5 times before. And it's not good enough just to have the commissioner say we're putting a bond measure up. Well, whoopee! Everybody wants more money, and unfortunately, that's the system that we're operating under. But I really think that if we could have community contact and have actual discussions in neighborhoods and get people to see and hear, not maybe to the degree of what we've gone through on these last 4 sessions and the details of this study, but to have a real sort of sense of, a summary of what they've discovered and presented to people, and have people have discussions like we're having here tonight and ask questions. I think that would go a long way toward getting people on board and would give us a chance to have feedback from the community so that people felt like they had a stake in this, that it was part of their decision making, which it should be. It's their money. So I guess I'm curious about the project manager that you want to bring on board. Is that person then, the plan is to have that person lay out this sort of communication project to the community that needs to happen?
When I say project management, it's not likely to be one person. It's likely to be a team.
Okay.
There are companies that specialize in this type of project management for these types of large complex projects that have a lot of the expertise they need on staff, or they contract with it in a subcontracting fashion. The community engagement component is something that we would probably do some of ourselves and some of it through a project management firm, depending on what will work best and be most cost effective and most efficient for us here in this community. I would venture to say that when we brought CGL on and we told them that this community really liked to be involved and had a very high level of expertise and very strong opinions, he didn't believe us fully. So, yes. So when we said that we were going to have 3 community forums, which has turned into 4, and 2 workshops, and then 22 sessions with community groups, we know that that's what we will probably end up doing moving forward as well. We will be regularly engaged, and again, I want to say proactive, going out to talk to people and not waiting for them to come to us.
And I think the county looking at, in addition to project management, elected officials, staff doing the conversations, that the neighbor-to-neighbor conversations is another part of it. This isn't an either-or. I think another part, and if people are interested in that, looking at what that might look like, is a really interesting notion. Not just interesting, I think it's really viable. We should take a look at what that would mean. Two more over here? Okay, great. Love all the feedback. Very helpful.
Hi, my name's Tina Taylor, and I work in the state prison system, and I'm very interested in the reentry issue here in Benton County. And so I'm wondering whether, and I haven't been able to be at the other meetings, so I don't know if this is, if you've already done this, but the sponsors program down in Eugene, in Lane County, is nationally famous for being fantastic for reentry, and across all the spectrum of needs for reentry. And I'm wondering whether your assessments have included looking at what they do and modeling, thinking about maybe modeling something here after that. And in fact, a few years ago, the director, Paul Solomon, I asked him if we could have a branch of sponsors up in our county, in our city, and he was like, "Go for it." But I'm here. I'm a citizen. I don't have any office or anything. So anyway, bringing that up right now.
Well, it's a highlight point. The probability of reoffending after reentry can be as high as 50% if you have untreated mental health and addiction issues going back into the system. It can also be a matter of life and death, and I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm not one of those the sky is falling person. But the data shows that the likelihood of an overdose for people who have addictions problems is much higher than the general population for people reentering. Why? They've been sober for a long time. They get out, they try to use at the level they had when they went in, and they overdose, and there are high fatalities. So reentry is important, and I say that. It's a life and death for a lot of people. And for victims, the reduction in offending and victimization is key with that population, so you want to do it right. And we didn't, in this study, include optimal places. There are other ones, too, that need to be looked at for looking at each intercept and what's the most effective way to respond and help people reintegrate, better lives, lower crime. Yeah, that definitely needs to be part of moving forward.
One of the things I would say to that, too, is that our community corrections program here in Benton County is well regarded. We do, I think, a pretty darn good job with reentry from the state prison system. But when it comes to dealing with people that we are released from our jail, on the other hand, we don't have programs in place for them. So we have that microcosm of the statewide picture, but there's not funding specifically for that element. And so we'd have to think hard about what we could do to address the needs here of those folks. And taking a look at the capacity they have done in Eugene and how they're funding it and operating it would be a great idea. So we'll look into that.
Somebody back here? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Mike Beilstein, as a former city councilor in Corvallis. I'm wondering about community partners in this, this major overhaul of law enforcement. There are institutions in our communities that are actually bigger than the county that, and I count the university, the city, the school district, that have a stake in this. I think in healthcare, in the prevention, items in option one, the first four are all healthcare related. So it seems like Good Samaritan Hospital should have a strong interest in helping to implement that. But can we actually get any of these other institutions that are in our community to actually bear some of the weight of this whole plan?
We all look your way.
Well, and I'm looking at Becky, who's sitting in the audience from Samaritan Health Services, and wondering whether she would like to say a word. We did include Samaritan in our steering committee, and represented by Becky Pape, and she has indicated that there is an interest on their part in partnering, perhaps on a sobering center. We need to really take a hard look at that, and again, what the return on investment will be.
Yeah. I think Commissioner said it well. We do have an interest in partnering with other major stakeholders, and what that partnership would look like, we can't say that now. We're so early in this, but early data that we have certainly show that our community and the healthcare system could benefit from a sobering center. A lot of what happens in the emergency department would be better cared for in a place where you don't need that high acuity. And so, and certainly mental health as well. And that's something that, again, we're early on into this, but we look forward to engaging with other partners as we move this along. As the Commissioner has stated, there's a lot of yet project management types of things that will need to be done to get us all in like groups and working towards outcomes. So yes, we are.
Hi. Even as a fairly well-informed citizen, I didn't know the statistic about Corvallis having such, or Benton County having such a high crime rate relative to other counties in Oregon and in the U.S. And I think we should not be so proud of our community as to keep the population from knowing that statistic, along with these other things that we see in the newspaper about being on the top 10 list of whatever it is. So not let our arrogance get in the way of that public information. And then the other thing I wanted to ask is whether by including the jail always in part of this package, we're turning off people who maybe would support a sobering center and other mental health treatment and a homeless facility if a bond issue to support some of those things came forward. I remember the last jail campaign and feeling that it was just a really slick PR attempt to get us to spend a lot of money on a huge project without really looking at the root causes and putting the money into the root causes. Personally, I'm convinced we need the whole package, but I'm just trying to see how we could convince the community and in what order to implement some of these good things.
Thank you. That's a great comment. And I think that what we learned through this process is that we want to go for a balanced approach. The community wants a balanced approach. And we just need to be able to express what that means very clearly and to, again, express what the community gains will be from doing so. And I agree, that's part of the reason we have the Sobering Center and further exploration on that topic and the Pretrial Services program and the data and evaluation as some of those first things we want to queue up, because we can do those without bond measures, at least the exploration and perhaps beginning to learn more by probing the system. So I'm hoping that we will be partway down our path by the time we go out for a bond measure and can say with very good faith that we are working on this entire vision and we're not just working on new buildings.
And I also wanted to comment on your point of the need for education and what's the current landscape. What do we see? What are we trying to do? And not to underestimate the need for that. We completely agree, of course, have that in the plan. Then how best to synthesize all this into the way people are used to digesting information. It's not through an hour presentation. And that's why I think teaming up with people who are in communications at the university and other things to help synthesize very complicated and technical information into this is what's happening and this is what we'd like to do, in addition to having more of the details behind it. So it's a big part of what needs to happen. And I hope humbly so, not arrogant. I hope with humility.
I'd like to just piggyback on that. I wear several hats in this equation. I'm on the steering committee. I'm the district attorney, and I'm also a citizen of Benton County. And what I'm hearing really resonates with respect to this information that isn't getting out to the community, and those that have said it should. Those who talk about how the previous attempts have not been successful, and is this going to be something that just winds up on the shelf again? And what really strikes me with that, this has been inspiring for me. Inspiring for me because one of the things I love about Benton County is that we're a modest-sized community. And when you have a modest-sized community, that means there's an opportunity to work together, okay? So What's different now than before? The difference now is that we have an opportunity to be more informed than we've ever been about a big decision that has to be made. Now, you may agree or not agree with the proposals, but the key is, are we informing ourselves? For instance, today we've just seen a summary. There is an assessment that has been done that has all kinds of information and so forth. I would say that each one of us should read that, because it's not a question of what are you going to do, it's a question of what are we going to do. Just as if our house, our roof was leaking and it's raining. What are we going to do? Well, before we spend a lot of money, we're going to make sure that we're as informed as we can possibly be. And so, as citizens of this community, that's a question that we have to ask is, what are we going to do? And I would invite each and every one of us to ensure that we've carefully read the entire assessment, to be able to then engage with that information and to be able to share it with others. Because I imagine that for each one of us that's here today, there's got to be 100 people that are just as interested who are not here today. And then, in essence, you become the base of information to be able to share that information with the other members of our community. And that's how we begin to share and help raise awareness about all of that. And I say that without advocating for decision one way or the other, but rather advocating for us to use our greatest strength as a small community to take action, to inform ourselves prior to making a big decision.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a nice way to wrap up. I think we're approaching that time.
Thank you. I think that was very well said, and I don't think that I can do any better than that, other than to thank everyone for coming tonight, and in particular, thanking our fantastic team on this assessment, and to once again state that this assessment is a really good starting point, and now we've got the hard work ahead of us. The assessment is available online, and we will send out a link again to that assessment online, and this entire evening's proceedings will also be available once they have been processed, and we will let you know when that happens.
Just a really quick note, if you hadn't signed in with your email address when you walked in, that's the list that we'll be using to distribute the report PDF. So if you'd like to receive an electronic version of the report, please just add your email address on your way out.
Thank you, Lilia. Thank you all.
Thank you.